Blessings, everyone. I'm Jules, and this is Activate Evolution, a pathway to infinite possibilities. And today we're going to be talking about what numerology is and the consciousness of numbers. And so, if you look on Google, it will say that numerology is basically the study of numbers when it's connected to something personal. So a lot of times people will take their birth date and they'll break it down, and then they'll have the life number and that sort of thing. And they kind of have a direct and very similar to astrology in order to kind of know what their life path is, what kind of person they are, that sort of thing. But we're going to be taking this in a completely different direction because yes, numerology for me it is the universal language. Numbers are the way that we can speak in frequency, and it kind of bypasses some of the language that has a lot of third dimensional or low density vibrations connected to it, and it's an easy way to communicate the meaning of something in a clear, pure way. With that, what I love about learning numbers and really starting to, of course, connecting them to the evolution technology on top of that, when you are using them to actually activate coding of the DNA, it definitely takes it even to the next level. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about that, and then we'll do some fun little activations, maybe do some ohm codes and that sort of thing. But for me, numbers is a state of consciousness because you are learning a new language. Just like any other language that you learn, there's consciousness behind that language, and the way that we quote unquote think can be connected to a language. I don't know if you guys have ever really thought about it, but I know like Victoria, I'm pretty sure you might be the only one that has a second language. I can't see everybody that's on, but the chances are that you probably think in the language that you speak in the most. It's interesting. My daughter, she's bilingual and she also speaks in Spanish. And when she was teaching she was teaching Spanish in a school, and it was, and what do you call it? Well, it was when all they do is speak Spanish. So it's integrated. She noticed that she was dreaming in Spanish, and when she was thinking, she was thinking in Spanish because she was actually speaking more Spanish than she was English, and so the way that she was thinking actually shifted. Well, the same thing is true when we really start to study numbers, is that we start to see everything in numbers, or we think in the frequency of numbers. So, why would we want to do that? Well, you can think about, if you are thinking in the pureness of a universal language, the consciousness that's connected to that, and that purity that is connected to that. But I'm going to tell you, one of the other things that starts to happen is that you start to take out the past and the future, because a number doesn't actually have a past and a future. So when you put something in a timeline, like the way that we think, you know, let's say John walked across the street. Well, all of a sudden, just because of the way that I said those words, I'm speaking as if John walked across the street. So is that past? Is it future? But all of a sudden, we have a picture of it, and it's created in a timeline. And because there's a beginning and an end, we are thinking in linear time. So when we start to think through numbers, we start to bypass linear time, and we see everything as frequency, but the frequency has an intelligence. It also has meaning, and that we don't actually have to think in timelines in order to communicate information. It's another way of doing that is, let's say it's the number five. Well, when we're in the beginning of what a five is, we're immediately going to go to, okay, well, what's a five? We'll go into our filing cabinet. We'll search through the intellect. Okay, I know five is freedom, change, travel, the ability to shift. It can also, in the negative form, mean somebody that is in resistance or is I would say resistance is probably the one, kind of trudging upstream could be the negative reflection of a 5. But once we know 5, and just like when we're learning a new language, if we have to think about what language is or what a word is in another language, we do have to kind of go through the filing cabinet in the beginning until we just know it. But then once we just start speaking it, we're not going through the filing cabinet anymore. We're just speaking it, right? Well, the same is true when we really master the language of numbers, is that we just think in frequency and we bypass the beginning and the end of a sentence. Now let's connect all of that to those of you that know the evolution card reading, is that we're actually teaching you how to speak the universal language of numbers, but we're also coding those numbers in very specific frequency patterns and activating DNA codes to hold intelligence of the patterns of numbers. So your body is actually being turned on and patterned to understand how to quote unquote think in frequency, bypassing a past and a future or a timeline. It's kind of advanced, but it's also everybody has the capability of doing it. And I'm going to say that this is one of the next of human evolution, is the ability to think beyond a timeline. Let me see if there's something else I want to talk about with the consciousness of numbers. Let me see if something's going to come through here. This is what I'm seeing. And this is what I love about codes, and we'll do some codes. So the evolution card reading is kind of the first step to codes, because you're really learning the numbers and you're learning how to read them and you're putting them together in patterns. And the technology is turning those patterns on in your body just by working with them. When we move into codes, we're actually activating codes or numbers to move into an expression. And that expression is a frequency that's released, but it's still in expression. And so the difference is that you start to kind of unhook from the matrix and you move in to the frequency of very specific intelligence, and that is done through coding or numbers. It's another way to shift from being an observation of the matrix, or the super hologram, I would call it, and actually start to identify in frequency. And one of my favorite stories of really working with numbers and coding myself was when I realized that I was starting to identify in frequency, because it's such an odd thing to go through. And I know a couple of you know exactly what I'm talking about, is all of a sudden things can just be going on around you, and normally you would have a chemical response to that, or at least have some thoughts about it. And then all of a sudden you're just completely neutralized. And it's almost like you see a pretty sunset even, and normally you'd have the emotional response and it'd be so beautiful, and even things that are a good chemical response start to go away. But what ends up happening is that you identify in the frequency of it. So you're actually seeing the sunset in a frequency, and that frequency is stabilized. It doesn't create an emotional response, but you can feel the frequency of a sunset. It's a completely different experience. But taking that to maybe something that we would call a negative response, where maybe we before would have fear or anxiety, and we're not feeling anything but frequency, it's a lot easier to bypass strong programming that may be connected to the experience that we're in. It is definitely the next in human evolution, because to start identifying as in frequency is bypassing programming of programmed reality and programming within ourselves. And it's a really cool ride. So with that, I'd like to just open it up to questions. And then what we'll do is we'll do an own code at the end, or maybe I'll do a reading. I haven't decided. We'll see what you guys want to do, but let's just open it up to discussion because I just think this is such a cool thing to talk about. And it's even more fun when you guys bring your questions and whatnot. Angie.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Um, I have a question. I've been thinking about this so much lately because I have experienced what you're talking about, that kind of neutrality, and it's not something that I'm holding yet very consistently, but I come in and out of it and I can feel it increasing. And I love it when it really directly relates to the unpleasantness of those negative reactions. But on the positive side, like you were saying, the sunset, for as an artist, beauty is such a part of just everything, and it's what lights me up. And I'm finding I recognize sometimes that I'm like, oh, it's
Oh, you just went silent, honey. I think you accidentally pressed mute.
can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, sorry. And I don't want to let that go. So sometimes I'm very conscious of, oh, I'm having a positive chemical reaction, but I don't want to let it go. And does that just take time?
It's gonna just organically happen. I can remember the first time that that happened for me, and it was such an odd thing, and I had to sit and question, like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And it was with a beautiful sunrise, and it was right after one of the evolution retreats. And I was sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, I feel nothing. I feel nothing. Why can't I feel something? And it wasn't that I was feeling bad, but I didn't have the emotion that you have come in with something like that. And so I really had a question, but what ended up happening is I stuck with it, right? Because I'm totally committed to the new human experience and I totally trust it as well. So I committed, and I did go through a period of time where it almost was so neutral that I felt pretty unplugged from everything because I wasn't
Mhm.
having emotional responses in a good or a bad way. And so it felt really weird. But what ended up happening once I kind of attuned my body to being used to not being in chemical response is that it started to move into frequency patterns. And that's when my first experience of with that was
Mm,
when I felt the frequency of love. And what I realized is that when I started to identify in the frequency of love, that I felt love for the same frequency for everybody, but nothing altered that frequency. It was just plugging in, and that frequency was there, and it was always there. So even if somebody did something that was wrong, or I would normally go into a chemical response of, it didn't alter the frequency because a frequency can't be altered unless we go into a program. So I chose to keep identifying in frequency because then it bypassed all programming. And then for me, as a frequency is so pure and so clean that I would much rather feel that than a chemical.
mm. And I'm feeling when you're telling me that this is just so new that it's just, I'm sort of in this space where I'm like, who am I? What am I doing? What what is happening? But I know what's happening and I know it's wonderful. So I'm hearing to just stick with it because the next is also has its own beauty and
It definitely does. Yeah, and so many times we hear, well, emotion is what makes us human. And that's true right now, right? Because
mm,
humans are programmed. But as an evolved human or the ascended human, we bypass programming where emotion doesn't exist anymore. And so we will be a new kind of human. I mean, that's why we call it the new human, right?
mm.
Because human without programming is a human without chemical responses. And then we'd unhook from the matrix or programmed reality, and then all of a sudden we're existing in frequency patterns, identifying in frequency patterns, and that's what we're kind of on the ride for, right? So let's see where it goes. But it is weird, Angie. Like I feel where
It
you
is.
because I was there.
But you make me feel really good about it. So I'm glad I raised my hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad that you said something too, because I'm sure you're not the only one that is having some sort of experience like that.
Thank you, Jules.
You. Hi, Jess.
Hi. So I'm kind of putting myself out on a limb here with this because I say it because I completely love what we're doing. But I'm surrounded by a lot of the ordinary world. I think most of us are, right? And particularly, where I live, I don't have a lot of contact with, well, anyway, forget that story. It's just that some people will think this is kind of crazy, right? I mean, with the lotus yesterday was so precious, but you're the invisible lotus with the leaf that returns. I mean, seriously, on some level, it's like if you can't get it, it seems like a little bit of madness. So, so I say it with love and humor. But I guess my question is about how, as I learn to work with the cards and work with clients and some people who are like even brand new to a spiritual world. So how this will be able to be communicated more through me rather than actually describing certain things, right?
Well, when you're doing a reading for somebody else, you're not describing anything, you're just reading, right?
Yeah.
So you're reading very specific information. And I've never done a reading where somebody didn't say at the end of it, that was the coolest reading I've ever had. Because it is so different and they can feel it, right? They can feel the
Right.
pureness of the frequency, but you're still speaking in language.
In language that
Say,
they can
okay,
comprehend.
you're a 5, 9, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're done with our reading. No, that's not what it's like. I think you've seen, if you go to the
Yeah.
Evolution Intuitive Readings YouTube channel, you can see what it's like to have a reading. They do some mini readings on there. But it's very specific, but it's also a frequency shift because there's codes, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they understand it or not, are turning on. I rarely have people that do readings that know what we're doing. They don't have any idea. They just come for the readings. And I have really high level business women actually that do the readings, and they do it for business advice.
Yeah.
They have no idea what I have a school or what we teach or anything. So it doesn't have to, like, what we're doing on some level, you could say is woo woo, but it's also very scientific. It's the perfect bridge between kind of that baby angel, you could say, or somebody that's just awakening, or even somebody that is just wanting to tap into the consciousness of their body, or somebody that's just looking for higher consciousness altogether. Those are all people, or I would say the other people that would be amazing with this are people that are very aware that we're living in the matrix and they're not sure how to unplug. All of, like, those are the kind of people that are going to be attracted to
Yeah.
this. And I always believe that we attract exactly what we are, right? So depending on where we are consciously are the people that will attract to us. I can remember, when I first started this work, of course, this was years ago, but I used to feel a little bit nervous about that too. It's like, is somebody going to think I'm crazy? Are they going to take my kids away? And then once I finally fully stepped into it, I mean, what we teach is so true. And now science is actually backing up. But when I first started this, there was no science backing up that we created our own reality and that what we focused on became real, and that quantum physics, even though we're breaking it at this point, is a real thing, right? And so for somebody to say that something is unreal or crazy just means that they're uneducated.
Yeah, I'm not particularly worried about it. I mean, I think part of my gift is that I can relate, or how I work through readings that I do now are very, people can connect in a way that they're not used to connecting. So I feel like this is going to be a beautiful addition, and I might even be able to shift out of, I am already shifting out of the way I've worked over the years. And so this is, I'm like, it feels really juicy, and
It is
like,
juicy.
and that, but that I may not be using the language so much as, the way you use the language, right?
You'll just be
We'll
reading.
just blend in. Yeah.
What I love about it, Jess, is that as you're learning to do the readings, you're learning a new language. So
Right.
you, on a personal level, will shift consciously, and your body's going to start to turn on frequency codes, and it's going to raise the frequency of your body. And all of these things are going to start happening for you. And then
Mhm.
when you're giving a reading and you're holding reflection, they're having the same experience. But it is a very amazing journey for you personally as the practitioner, because you're committing to learning a language through frequency, and you will shift because of it. So
And
it's a
it's the
win-win.
frequency that's missing, really. It's a certain, not that it's been absent, but being connected to my own, the frequency for myself, because there are places and people where I don't know how to help them move through something, and the words don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, you'll still be speaking in words because you're
Yeah.
going to read the numbers, but you're reading them through frequency, because you're reading the information through a number and not through uh an image, or and even like, I love cards. I have some other kind of cards that I'll play with every once in a while, but they're different, right? Because
Yeah.
they are, I think they've been around long enough that they've created their own consciousness, and it's just not as pure. And there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I think whoever's reading can translate through that and bring it to a really pure place, but the numbers do it for you. And having the image there too, as they're being coded through the symbol itself, is just a lot of fun. I mean, you just got to do
Yeah.
it. Thanks,
I'm
Jess.
in.
Oh, go ahead. Did you have another question?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Does anybody else have a question or something that, oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just had a quick comment. Victoria and I were talking earlier, and this came up, that what you just said about when we go ahead and we start, people that are in your life are the ones of where you're at. And then as you raise in frequency, those people go, and kind of being in that middle spot and just kind of getting reflection on that again, that to not give up, that there are not people that are going to meet you where you're at, because there aren't a whole lot of us, but there are people waking up all over in different groups, and to just keep that faith that just because those people are gone, you're in that lull, there is that next step
There
of
definitely
people.
is.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. And then you always have us too.
yes,
And have
absolutely.
each other.
Absolutely. But it feels good to kind of hear that confirmation that as others go and you're in that middle spot, there is something, there are people, places, and things that will meet you in that frequency eventually.
I also want to reflect back that eventually what will happen is you're not going to care as much. It's because you can find ways to connect even in the collective where maybe you can't right now, because once you start fully shift and move into identifying in frequency and the expression of intelligence, it really doesn't matter anymore, right? But we still can be discerning. And I mean, one of the things that I am really, really conscious of is what I do with my time, right? Because I only want to be investing in something that's going to be raising my frequency or pushing me into evolution. So I think if there's anything that changes, it would be that, of what am I choosing to do with my time? And of course, that's going to include who am I choosing to spend it with. Yeah. Anybody else have a question or something that they want to reflect on? Angie, we'll go Angie and then Luann.
Just really quick, just along the lines of what you and Jennifer were saying, one of the beautiful things that's happening is that I'm realizing how much I went outside of myself for comfort, for support, for, for all these things that you feel like you need someone else to give to you. And along the lines of what you and Jennifer were saying, one of the great things is now I have, I'm not I'm not doing this when I'm sad I'm going in, and I'm finding this infinite well of providing that for myself. And that is excellent. And it's really beautiful.
I love that. And that does start to happen, right? That's that empowerment piece where,
Hmm.
and that's, I also want to say that we all will get to a place where, unity is going to come from a place where we truly don't need other people for anything. But until then, when we are in a state that you're starting to tap into, is that we're not looking for emotional support. We're not even looking for confirmation. We're not looking for approval. We're just looking for reflection so that that third energy can come in, right? The 1 to the 2 to the 3. And that's how we start to use our relationships. If use is the word, is that it's just to create a reflection for that third energy that maybe you would have a harder time tapping into without it. So both people are coming together for evolution. And it's a beautiful place to have a relationship because it always has a purpose and it's never based on programming. Yeah, it's exciting. Luann?
This is probably more a reflection. It's interesting because I have been sitting with this last week in the classes that we've done, Breaking Quantum and then NEP this week. There's so much change in my own body and my own relationship with my body. And what I'm experiencing is I don't feel or sense or see any of the energy systems that have been part of the body that's all I've known. I'm talking chakras and meridians and, that kind of thing. And when you just said it's identifying in frequency, because there's been a part of me that's been questioning that a little bit, but all of a sudden it just, turned on that it's that identifying in frequency and not the body and not the systems of the body and not the matrix, not the programming that tells me this is that. It's just, yeah. So I don't know if you or anybody's got anything to say about that, that'd be great, but it's more just the space to say it and the reflection of it.
I love it. And that's exactly right. What you're experiencing is one of our steps is to stop identifying in form or programming or the body and to start identifying in frequency. And that is, I mean, that's ohm codes, right? That is the transition from DQ to ohm codes is in DQ, you're still in the I am because you're identifying in form. Even to say I am divine, you're still saying I am something. To identify in frequency is truly shifting to the other side and being in an expression, and then you're consciously attuning to that expression and identifying in it. So it's still you're identifying in something, but you're no longer identifying in form. And it is a very big conscious shift. And numbers is one of the fastest ways to start to identify in frequency because it's teaching consciousness through frequency. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thanks.
sharing. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, should we do a mini reading or should we do an ohm code? Do you guys have a preference? How many people, raise your hand of the people I can actually see that wants ohm codes? Okay, almost everybody did. So we'll do an ohm code. All right, so what are we gonna, let's just code. Let's just see what comes through. Kathy, do you mind writing it down and then we'll read it? We'll do that. That'll be fun. Okay, so if you want to place your hands on your heart, you're welcome to. We're just connecting to that heart space and inviting in that divine frequency Just allowing that frequency to enter the bloodstream. And just noticing as it enters the bloodstream, is just bringing it into that ascended state where your body begins to shift from form to frequency. And we'll move into the pineal gland, into the ascended cell, tracing along the ascended DNA, identifying the code that we'll be working with today. Okay, so we're going to bring our attention to negative 951,687. And just allowing that to move into random form as we pull it through the double helix into source frequency. As it moves into those particles of possibility, bringing the frequency of source as it moves through the ascended DNA, turning on the code of positive 5139722. We'll allow that to sequence as it moves into expression, activating the electric responses of the body as it connects to the H3O2 and the hydrogen bonds of every DNA of the body, creating the bridge between form and frequency. And just seeing your body as it lights up, holding this intelligence, even allowing your consciousness to merge with this intelligence, allowing your consciousness to think as this intelligence. And then we can bring our hands to prayer position and we say, thank you, I love you, it is done. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm wondering if we should read the negative, but we'll just read the positive numbers. I wanted to write them down because I like to be able to see them. Grab a piece of paper here, Kathy, and then I'll have you tell me what those were.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
5, 1, 3, 9, 7, 22.
Okay. So I'm just going to read it just like we would in a language. So the change is creating a new beginning of the creation of God as a channel of the master creator. So the frequency means that there's a shift that's creating a new beginning, that's opening up creation of what we call that divine intelligence, that God frequency. But that God frequency is creating an open channel of communication to become the master creator. So the master creator is that place where we are creating. And I love that the 7 is right behind. I mean, this, like, all of this is just the perfect sequence of creating outside of the matrix. Because to be a master creator, that 22 energy, that's outside the God sphere, right? It's outside of the matrix altogether. But then that 3, 9, and 7 together are basically opening up that creative energy so that you can connect to the highest frequency of that God consciousness that opens up the ability to channel as that consciousness that brings you outside the matrix as the master creator, creating the new earth reality, the new body, whatever words you want to put there. So that is the frequency that you are now holding. That's a little bit different than doing an evolution reading, because that is in ohm codes, but it is very similar in the fact that you just turned on specific frequency patterns through the consciousness of numbers. Are there any questions, or does anybody want to share before we get off today? All right. Well, I love you all so much. And for those of you that are just tapping in and listening, or maybe watching this on YouTube, we are celebrating you in this upcoming year as we all commit to our personal mastery so that we can create change within ourselves and within the world. And until we meet again, go and live to your highest potential.